morning, everybody. Aloha. I have been training. My name is Agnieszka Beszczyńska-Müller. I'm a physical oceanographer with the Institute of Oceanology, Polish Academy of Sciences, mostly working in the Arctic. And also I'm a member of the program committee. And on behalf of all organizers, I very warmly welcome you to the day 4 of OceanOps 19. The main topic for today is integration, but before we go to that, we would like shortly reflect on the main outcomes of the previous day. And the same as yesterday, we would like to give you a voice with the Slido. So Fei, please provide more details.
Good morning. My name is Fei Chai. I'm a professor at the University of Maine and also Second Institute of Oceanography in Hangzhou, China. So for the next hour, we're going to hear the report out from yesterday's innovation day, primarily the preliminary and then 7 special sessions. But also we have the audience participation analysis through Slido. So you have the opt-in, all right? So by now, some of you probably know through yesterday, it's different than 4-star voting or the questions. What does it mean and opt-in? So you will have roughly over 20 different recommendations from those 7 sessions. So you can choose the most important ones or a few for you, or you can choose all of them. But there is a trick there. And if you set up your profile on Slido with your email, depends on what the session chairs will do for the next 10 years. They may keep sending you emails asking you to do things. So choose those opt-in carefully, and then I think that's going to be very important. All right? So,
so we have a lot of information to get through in the less than 1 hour. So let us begin. And first, let's bring up Justin to give a summary of the yesterday innovation plenary session.
So we should have some slides coming up. If we don't, it'll be shadow puppets. The first slide, if you remember from yesterday, was a really cool picture with a lot of technology on it. That was Innovation Day. So that was the first slide. But the second slide was really important. There we go. Awesome. Anyway, so the objective here is to very quickly review most of yesterday before lunch, right? So the plenary and the panel. If you recall at the outset, we laid out these questions. So this was sort of yesterday's big deal poll, big topic poll, and just some observations. So this was the results of that poll as of last night. My favorite observation is 452 of you all voted, right? So more individuals engaged this poll than showed up at OceanOps 99, right? We are growing, we are thriving. And then you can make your own assessment of what you think of those various results, but pretty clearly turning what we all do in observing the ocean into value, converting ocean observations into products and services was far and away the biggest winner. And then inspiring future ocean observers came in second there. So I think that's very exciting, right? We have a clear goal. We need to get things done. And we clearly feel like the next generation needs to be brought along with that goal. So very briefly in the plenary and the panel, we touched on various domains. We touched on all of the world's global oceans. We had input from a variety of programs across the globe. And essentially, as we thought about it, and kudos to my colleague Menina, we sat down and said, you know, what were the discussion points in the morning? And they were sustainability, suitability, and society. And this gets to the fact that reality is, even though we're observing the ocean, we need to be stewards. And as we go about our business of observing the ocean, our tools and our techniques need to be fit for purpose. Right? They need to line up with the objective So don't overinvest, don't underinvest, try to get that Goldilocks spot and get it just right. And then society, it's very important that we create an ecosystem, particularly harnessing the power of innovation, so that all the stakeholders can both benefit from and contribute to, whether that's local knowledge, whether that's crowdsourced data, whether that's PhD level research, whether it's startup companies. The societal interplay needs to be holistic. So from there, we had some other highlight observations, and we're not putting forward recommendations as the breakout sessions were, so you don't have to pick any of these or identify any as a favorite, but these are the things we think we heard. Exponential growth. This challenges our human experience, right? The concept of exponential growth in technologies and capabilities is hard to get our heads around. However, we can create a world of abundant ocean data. And then ideally from data will be information, and from information will be understanding. And at the end of the day, at the end of that reasoning chain, hopefully comes some wisdom in the behavior of all of our citizens and all of our policymakers. Technology can and certainly is changing the economics of ocean data collection, from remote sensing to in situ to coastal. Technology is changing how we can go about getting that data that create abundant ocean data. We definitely had a lot of conversations about balancing this idea of rare and exquisite, a few very expensive and powerful tools with ubiquitous and simple. And we certainly envision that, driven by the technology, there'll be this future abundant ocean information, and it's going to democratize the data and enable new value propositions. And our last set of observations relate to the people. Right? At the end of the day, we're all human beings. It's our shared planet, our shared ocean. And crossing the boundaries of politics, geography, and culture is really, really important to innovation, just as it is to effective ocean observing. Entrepreneurs and small businesses are agile, they're driven, they're motivated, they're often underrepresented in our thinking. Moonshots are powerful, and by the way, my favorite, if there was a Slido poll, it's like, how do we replace moonshots with a relevant ocean observation term? What is our ocean observing equivalent to moonshot? Right? It's a powerful concept, we get it, we need another name of our own, because we want to capture the imagination and public support. Collaboration, partnerships. We're all in this room together, we're in this together. Last couple of points, and I really want to thank Riley Hathaway, who was on our panel, an amazing young lady. And she reminds us the next generation are digital natives. So let's offer a positive message. Let's start today, and we'll take one step at a time to the innovation of the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Johnston. So the first 7 special breakout sessions is going to be community building and dialogue. And John White from COL will present their top recommendations. John.
Waiting for my...
Getting closer to the mic.
No.
You got it, That's fine. Yeah.
Green button. Big green.
There. Well, first of all, I just want to thank our extremely active audience. Everyone was engaged. You really put Slido through its paces in terms of answering questions that we had preloaded, asking questions, and then a lot of vocal engagement as well. So that was really, the day was all about innovation. That was innovative for me. I can still remember the transition from Harvard Graphics to PowerPoint. So Slido was something brand new, and that was before the first Ocean Obs, by the way. So what we came up with really is a lot of great recommendations, but if we look at a lot of common principles and best practices, and how do we codify those and make sure that they can be shared? When we say the user community and the users, there are many different parts of that, and we need to understand that. But if we can have a way to make sure that those are fully shareable, maybe through the Ocean Best Practices system, something that's set aside really for community engagement and dialogue, of how can maybe, whether it's India or Indiana, or whether it's Texas or Tasmania, what are the commonalities of engaging, whether it's at the local township, the regional, what levels do we really build that community, and can we learn from each other, not reinvent wheels? So I think that was a very important message. Part of that really gets to the second recommendation, which is how do we sit down with the various user groups and co-develop the value propositions? What are the use cases that we can use those to advance the importance and build the larger community? Like was pointed out, from folks who, one of our speakers was was Katie Hill from the World Meteorological Organization, who has done that with weather observation and been part of that as well, and very much aware of that. So how do we look at those use cases and really apply those to the ocean as well? And as we develop those, we also start to actually realize, in order to do this, of course, we need more money. We need more money for ocean observations. We all know that. It's expensive. But we have to use some of those resources to really look at how we build that greater community and grow the various communities involved. And a lot of that includes we have to understand and be able to fund the types of broad economic studies or specific targeted economic studies and things that can really show the value. We talked about, it was mentioned, the great actual study that was done by Zdenka Willis and the IUS group in the US, which really came to show evaluation of the US IUS system and the US Ocean Observing System, which is equal to that of the National Football League. Very famous thing, and I was very encouraged to hear that I believe NOAA is going to take on to update that study in the coming months. So that's great, and how do we use that, but how do we, again, go back to all the target audience and build those? So you can see these 3 high recommendations are very much linked, and there are a lot of other recommendations that actually came out as well. So again, I want to thank all the panelists. They did a fabulous job. I want to thank all of our co-organizers. They really helped us to build that subject matter. And again, if you were in there, you know how engaged, how active, and how much everybody had a chance to really participate. And those voices, I assure you, will help inform the efforts of a lot of us going forward. Thank you very much.
The next breakout session to present the highlights, it's Integrated Ocean Observations, Part 2. And this will be presented by Aitaru Oka from the University of Tokyo.
Thank you. This is a series for 3 days, integrated ocean observation session led by 3 GOOSE panel members, plus Jack Berth. And day 2, we had a theme of diverse stakeholders' needs. And the main question is how can diverse stakeholders work together well to improve and build existing and emerging ocean observing systems under the framework of ocean observing in the next decade. And in the first half, we had 4 talks by stakeholder representatives who gave their perspectives on addressing the diverse stakeholder needs. And we had talks by Susan Wefels at Hall, who represented the international science community and ocean climate and carbon tracking stakeholders. Lisa Levin from Scripps, who represented the various deep sea stakeholders. Nadia Pinaldi at the University of Bologna, who represented the operational services. And Sebastian Dehalu at the Saildon Inc., who represented the surface ocean stakeholders and private companies. And in the second half, we made a roundtable discussion, and based on our 3 prepared recommendations, and discuss how can facilitate the full implementation in the next decade to meet the needs of diverse stakeholders. And the audience also participated in discussion, and not only the speakers, but the audience participated by using the microphone and the Slido. And we had a very intense and active, stimulating discussion. So I thank all of the participants. And here are the all 3 recommendations. So, and the first one is about the observation requirements, and the recommendation is develop new mechanisms within the framework of ocean observing to ensure that the observing system is truly multipurpose and multidisciplinary and serves diverse stakeholders. This may include developing new categories of essential ocean variables connected to human activities. And the second one is about the data to information, and is develop incentives to reward data providers and invest in data assembly centers and integrated data services with expert curation to ensure that the data from stakeholders are fair, open, and free, contribute to the ocean observing system value chain. And the third one is all the full framework and the stakeholder communication and engagement. And the recommendation is to develop tailored communication strategies for the integrated observing system to encourage stakeholder feedback and engagement processes. The strategies should include prioritization of ocean information and ocean observation needs. And today we have the part 3 of this breakout series for integrated ocean observations. So please attend again. Thank you.
Thank you. The next breakout session is on modeling and simulation innovation, and the recommendations will be presented by Santa Aquila from NASA.
On behalf of Andrea Soto, the co-organizer, I would like to thank all the organizers for having our breakout session, and our 5 panelists who presented talks from various themes that span the modeling and simulation spectrum, and the 70 or 80 participants who joined our breakout session. We had about 80 minutes of questions and answers devoted via Slido and also through the microphones. And over here are 3 recommendations that are primarily a distillation that we arrived at, and we try to limit overlap with the other breakout session recommendations. So the first one is to promote investment for organized workshops, training programs, and targeted meetings so that it fosters interaction between observational, modeling, and data assimilation communities. The hope is that this is implemented or promoted end-to-end from funding agencies all the way, think of the NASA SPURS field campaign, the way it was executed with a modeling component along with it. The next recommendation is to encourage observation simulation experiments, observation system simulation experiments, which are very powerful tools that could enable us to identify best practices that would be useful for providing metadata, consistent quality controls, things of that nature. And the modeling and data simulation community is actively involved in designing and developing these OSCs and OSCCs. This is a big endeavor for us, and that's probably one of the most valuable tools that can be offered in conjunction to having field campaigns rolled out, or perhaps planning in a specific instrumentation deployment as part of field campaigns. The third recommendation is utilize modeling and data assimilation capabilities for designing or redesigning observation network. This could go along with the planning of observational field campaigns or observational networks, and also that could be used to improve model physics. Now here is a concrete example of it that was pointed to us by one of our panelists. Is think of with some confidence that a hurricane is going to pass by, you probably want to change the cycling of the Argo network so that it cycles more frequently in the upper oceans. And likewise, the other thing that you could have is place observational network where you know that the models are more biased, or they have they don't perform very well in terms of physical parametrations. And so since I have about 90 seconds or so, I could go into some other topics that didn't show up over here on the recommendations, of, which is about enhancing assimilation or uptake of coastal and biogeochemical observations. They are more and more being available on almost all the platforms. And so if the formats are homogenized and they're available more or less in a near real time, then the modeling and data assimilation community could work with the observationalists to ingest them and assimilate them, and that could not only help us getting a good handle on long-term reanalysis states like carbon uptake and such. For example, by 2029 or so, it could also help planning future missions and such. I guess I'll do one more item, which is, now this was a recurring thing that came all the time, was improving high resolution models, but if we want to improve them, we also need to think of how to initialize and data assimilate. For all that, the connections are through better, more accurate observations at a higher spatial temporal timescales. Thanks.
Thank you. The next set of recommendations come from the breakout session, Observing Technology Innovation, Platforms and Communications, and they will be presented by Dana Manalang from University of Washington. Please, Dana.
Thank you. So I just want to thank my co-lead, Jeff Ellen from NIWC, and our panel speakers, Chris Meinig, Amanda Netburn, and David Lang, who all came together, and we talked a lot about the platforms that we have in our toolkit, specifically focusing on persistent and distributed systems. And so the first recommendation really gets to the agreement that persistent, distributed, extensive ocean observation platforms are needed. And we polled the audience, so we made use of the Slido as well, and to ask about the gaps that we have, and they were all over. There was a very broad set from deep ocean to shallow water to coastal to mid-ocean, and also a consensus around the need to have just a larger spatial scale of sampling. And so, so that really led us to this first suggestion, is that the community really needs to emphasize turning prototype tools and individual sensors into integrated platforms and production systems. And so what this means, thinking in terms of scaling and transition of, what most of our ocean sensors and even the platforms we have out there are really on prototype scale. And so as we move in to trying to transition these, we need to realize, one, that the ocean community doesn't have to go it alone, that there are tools out there, there are established best practices in system engineering and in data management. And so we've seen some great examples of internal collaboration on things like the Argo program, but how can we start being more inclusive and bringing in more disciplines from citizen scientists to kind of to engineering, material science, data science, and to draw those communities into these efforts. Also was recognized that as we transition to these types of platforms, that we need to remember to calibrate them against existing data sets, and that some of them will carry the need for further infrastructure, which may mean things like acoustic navigation networks in GPS-denied areas such as the Arctic. So the second recommendation really flows from that, and that is to keep early and continuous connection across the different disciplines. We want to make sure that the researchers, engineers, and technologists and data scientists are really all working together, even at the inceptions of these programs. So we identify kind of the global objectives, and then to bring all of these groups together rather than to try to focus on what the final solution is first. Identify the objectives and then let that flow down through requirements to make sure that they're met. And so thirdly is establishing, to really grow that network and that line of communication is really establishing a stronger pipeline for innovators from engineering, computer science, data science, material science, people who haven't traditionally been engaged in the ocean community to a great extent. And so how do we grow that communication? We mentioned starting young, having more community involvement, interdisciplinary communications. Can we set up endowed faculty within these disciplines at universities that are, that are focused on ocean-specific problems, and so to start bringing more of the technology into the community at a quicker pace.
The next, thank you. The next breakout session is on observing technology innovation sensors, and then the recommendation will be presented by Rosemary Moreau. Please. Thank you.
Oops. Thank you. We had a very dense and interesting session looking at what's coming up in the next decade, what's programmed and what can be planned in the next decade in terms of satellite innovation. And one of the points that I'm happy to follow on from my colleagues here in the overviews is that all satellite innovation that gets developed is always accompanied by modelling and assimilation advances. If you have new technology observing new scales in new geographical areas, the coasts or high latitudes, then there needs to be similar scales being represented and similar dynamics or biogeochemistry being represented in the models, and also in the ways that we're developing our assimilation techniques to take that into account. The second part of that, of course, is also that the in situ data also needs to accompany the different scales and the different regions we're looking at with this innovative satellite techniques. So that's for CalVal, but also for understanding what's the vertical structure underneath these new observations that we're getting at the surface with the satellite data. The second thing is also continuity, because satellites provide us with global coverage, long-term time series, and as we move towards new technology that has higher, finer resolution scales or moving into different geographical areas, that needs to be linked back to our long-term time series, and so also feeding in then into operational series. And there needs to be continuity. If we start observing the Arctic for 5 years and then we stop, that's a big problem for all of the downstream users and our science and applications. So these themes were developed in other breakout sessions, but our community just wanted to insist that innovation in satellites is not alone. It's really part of an improvement over all aspects that needs to go ahead together. So our session really concentrated on the 5 or 6 groups that were there. We have intermediate recommendations for that are available on Slido. So in terms of our 3 overarching recommendations, the thing that came out of all of our discussions with the community is that satellite innovation is responding to giving us higher resolution coverage both in space and time. And this is needed so that we can look at smaller scale structures in the open ocean, but also extend that into the polar regions, the coastal and regional seas where we're at the moment sometimes blocked by cloud cover or by approaching islands, and also into the equatorial band for more rapid temporal coverage. And as I said before, this also needs to be linked back into the continuity of the satellite observing system. The second major thing is that we need to fly missions that will cover gaps in the observed ocean climate variables or ocean variables. Where the technology exists now, we have the technology capability to measure the net total surface currents. We don't have missions flying at the moment, but the technology exists. We'd really like to push for that, as well as things like wave spectra and using things like LiDAR to, with ocean parameters that are well adapted to look at the vertical plankton distribution. And the third part is to promote synergy and coordination between the different space agencies and groups, so that we can have multiple sensors and platforms, disciplines that will give us an integrated virtual constellation in these new areas, such as the coasts, high latitudes, etc., that will be able to have multi-parameter dynamical and biogeochemical observations of the small rapid scales, and also to have this coordination so that the CalVal infrastructure is maintained over time. We can come back and reprocess our long-time climate series, and that is coordinated across multi-missions and multi-satellites. So we had a very active session, and it was very nice having all the interaction back also from the different participants for this session. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rosemary. And the next exciting breakout session was on open source software revolution. And recommendations from this session will be presented by Kjell Hentenman from Earth and Space Research. Kjell, please.
Hi, thank you. I'd like to thank my speakers. We had a really active, full of discussion breakout session. We started off, we had an introduction to open source software. And we covered some of the definitions and what that really means and how to publish open source software. We then had two oceanographer speakers, Joseph Gum and Danny Clark, and they talked about their experience and how publishing open source software has enabled their science and expanded their number of collaborations. We then had two agency speakers from NOAA and NASA who talked about the agency's stance on open source software and where they expect, how they see, the agencies see open source software enabling science. So during the session, we went through, we had some talks, we had a lot of discussion. At the end, we had a lot of discussion about where the gaps in our current capabilities to publish and develop software, where we are and where we need to go. And we talked a lot about how to get there and how to bring the community towards this goal of open source software. So why do we care about software? We're here for science, right? But software is central to science. It's part of what we do, and it shouldn't be seen as a burden to publish your software and to share it with other people. Making software that is readable by others, that they can build on, is central to doing science. Making and writing good software is going to allow us to go further, and it will allow us to go there faster. So developing your skill at writing good software and being able to publish it with an open source license so that other people can use it is going to advance science and increase innovation. One other thing that it's going to help is it's going to help with collaborations. And this is an example of the PyTroll GitHub repository. So this is an animation, a movie of how that repository works. And it started off, those dots on the screen are bits of code and subroutines. This is a library that's used a lot in the meteorological community and is starting to be used in the oceanographic and remote sensing community. It handles satellite data very easily, regridding and resampling. It started off with one person deciding to write a few routines, and then they had a few friends that came and said, well, I like that, I'm going to help contribute, let's write it. And they were publishing it on GitHub, and you can see that people can work on different parts of the code, and you start developing a library that is now used by thousands of people to advance their science faster. So publishing your software in a way that others can build on it does expand your collaborations and builds your community. So we came up with 3 possible recommendations, and these recommendations are based on developing capabilities. We feel like there's a gap between our community's ability to publish open source software, to understand how to license it and do it correctly, to understand how to use GitHub effectively to enable collaborations. And these resources could include, but aren't limited to, education, to identifying and funding maybe early adopters or champions. So you train the trainers. So you bring together people who are interested in it, train them, they go out and bring this knowledge to their local communities. Workshops, hackathons. I can say I was at a hackathon 2 weeks ago, and they're really fun. You learn a lot. And also, one thing that we really need to do is we need to ensure credit. If people are going to be publishing their software, we need to make sure that not only the funding agencies, but also institutions and academia recognize that publishing software is part of science and is a contribution to science. So being able to give your software a DOI, a digital object identifier, making your science reproducible by publishing your repository on GitHub and adding a Binder Hub link so that someone can just click on that repository and they are instantly in your research environment and can run through every result and create every figure in your paper. And reporting on your GitHub activity. These are all things that are going to help ensure credit so that especially early career scientists don't suffer by just publishing their software. They feel safe doing so and that perhaps their career won't be jeopardized, that it is part of doing science. And it's important that our community recognize that. And the last part is that we need consistent support. So with these open source libraries that are in existence, there's sometimes hundreds, sometimes thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of scientists relying on these libraries and using them to advance their science. And so we need to make sure that we support the development of existing open source libraries. Rather than reinvent the wheel over and over, we need to support the people who are doing the work that makes all of our science easier. And this could allow federal employees to work on open source projects, to have grant add-ons so that postdocs or you yourself could actually work on developing software for the community. And we really see this as open source software, if we can get the community to move towards this as enabling science, advancing science, and allowing more time for innovation, because in the end, the goal is to spend less time writing software and more time thinking about science. Thank you.
Thank you. The last 7 breakout sessions is on UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. The recommendation will be presented by Vladimir Ranambini from IOC UNESCO. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Chair. And you know, it was a breakout session, but definitely it is important for everyone here sitting in this room to know what is going to happen with oceanography of the future and the decadal scale of your conference and the fact that we are thinking in decadal scale in planning oceanography is very important. So the session was well attended, and would like to show to you the photos of the people who were panelists exactly in the same order. You can imagine that you are in the room, and I thank them all. They were absolutely excellent. And special thanks go to Molly Power Store of Pacific Community, who was the moderator, master of Slido, and I think because of her skill, we came to some excitement in the room. So it is important, I think, that everyone knows what is going to happen in oceanography in 10 years to come. We were able to convince United Nations that oceanography is important for the future of the planet. And the words that were really understood by politicians were that we need the ocean we need for the future we want. Now we were charged, and this community, I think, will be very much involved in the designing the science we need for the ocean we want, because ocean health is a science-intensive area. So we need to mainstream oceanography for the sake of future of the planet. And this is exactly the idea of Decade of Sustainable Development, and every word counts in the title, and also now we're moving to the design of the decade. Now about the session. So, you know, our idea was, of course, to inform your community about the decade and engage this community. The slide showed that at the beginning there was just equal spread of those who knew nothing or knew something, and by the end of the time, we already had people saying that, you know, they really understand what this is all about. And that was really important. I would like also to state that there was some enthusiasm shown in the room, and it was also important for us to present to you the areas of development in research and technology that we are going to propose for the decade. These areas are shown on the slide, and of course observing system is very important, is fundamental at upstream, but we also, we're very pleased to see that what resonates with people were also studies of ecosystems, work on information. And you know, this Oceanops participation community, you know, you probably will agree that there are not so many people from developing countries here, but you know, this community is able to contribute to capacity development as well. So it was very good for us to understand that our proposed research development areas resonate with you, and this will be also contributing to societal applications such as coastal zone management, maritime spatial planning, development of blue economy, the work on climate adaptation, mitigation of climate change. So I think we were very positive in the room. What also was highlighted to us, and this I think also is quite visible in the discussions, that focus to coastal issues is important, indigenous perspectives, ethical perspectives are important, and once again we were reminded that the decade is such a time that we have to think and involve young people. So if they will be finishing the decade, they will be the beneficiaries of that decade. So we have 9 months before we'll have to submit the implementation plan to United Nations General Assembly. This will happen during Northern Hemisphere summer of 2020. So 9 months is the time to formulate projects. The projects will be really ambitious. Remember, world ocean circulation experiment, tropical ocean global atmosphere study. Remember, a census of marine life. We think of some largest projects in the history of our science. So please contribute to the design. So the Ocean Decade is a chance to register, it's a chance to participate, a chance to contribute to the future of the planet. But I think I have to go because I'm already 63 years old, and many people say we have to really leave our space to younger people. We have to turn into mentors. So young people, come on board, please. And all the people, you others will remain. Thank you.
Now? Oh, it's better. As you well know, in addition to the breakout sessions yesterday, we also had a number of very interesting special sessions. And they were held in parallel with the plenary session. So because we know that you could not be everywhere at the same time, we would like to walk you very, very swiftly through the main recommendations which were submitted by the special session leaders. So Faye, please start.
Thank you. So as Anaska said, there's 5 special sessions, and then we divided task among 2 of us, and I went to 3 special sessions, spend about 15-20 minutes each, as I get a feel. And then here are the reports from the first 3. The first one is environmental DNA in ocean observing. And then there's 3 top recommendations. Is really build a coordinate and distributed eDNA monitoring network, leveraging existing program. I guess the key word here is leveraging existing program that include acoustic, optical, and then traditional and other environmental measurements when possible. The second is develop internationally accepted practices. I think this is the best practice for a marine eDNA collection, analysis, processing, sample archive, and data management. Greatly expand a current genomic reference libraries, and then for marine species, prioritizing and group based on the users' needs. I think this is, again, the users' needs to expand. The second group is really how to research institutions will enable innovation for global observing systems goals over the next decade. And so the number one is really to strengthen the relationship between the federal entities and also, I think, the foundations and NGOs with research institutions to improve the overall observing systems. Increase the life of the floats, and then we heard about worry about too many instruments falling into the bottom of the sea. And then this is the part is really the battery. Increase the accuracy, stability of the sensors, support science-based research during the development stage. This is very, very important for many of the researchers, the science-based during the development. And then sustain the phase, the platform-based observing. I guess that's more operational mode. All the data should be accessible to the public as early as feasible. The third group is innovation in ocean observing platforms and infrastructure. And I think this is the establishing international working groups. The working groups is very important, emphasize on the different platforms, and then they have their own needs. I think this is really important. And harmonize the data and cross the different platforms. Pilot a sustained multi-purpose acoustic network and monitoring tomography, underwater positioning, and communication. I guess start with Arctic. It's a unique location environment. If you can make it in the Arctic, you can make it anywhere. So expand it to the global. The transition telecom and sensors and smart cable system from the present pilot to the transocean and to address climate, ocean circulation, sea level, tsunami, etc. So Bruce sent me an email this morning. There's a press release. The French government just supported the smart cable pilot project, and from Noumea, New Caledonia, to Vanuatu, and then for $20 million US, and that's 300 kilometers. Thank you. The next.
Not yet. We are not yet done. Two more to go. Could you bring up the slides again? Okay. So the next special session was this NASA session, Oceanography from Space, and they provided 4 main recommendations. First one is that feedback processes with identified users and resource stakeholders are needed from the beginning and should be reviewed on an ongoing basis to identify what is fit for purpose for users and social benefit, and also to adjust it as needed. Then case studies can highlight the value of ocean observing information product so that nations will want to commit to sustain ocean observing activities. Their third recommendation is to take into account existing pieces, commitments and regulations for developing a fit-for-purpose ocean observing system. The last one is to define targets and success indicators for a fit-for-purpose ocean observing system in 2030 and a mechanism how and when it will be evaluated. And the last special session yesterday was entitled Powering the Blue Economy, Energy Innovation for Ocean Observations. The session was led by US Department of Energy. And the main points which they recommend are summarized as following. Overcoming power limitations in ocean observations could provide tremendous value by providing new data streams and enabling new capabilities. It should be proactive rather than reactive monitoring. It should include high temporal resolution BGC data, gliders that can run climatology lines between the opportunistic case studies, and also further discussion at Ocean 19 in Seattle. The next recommendation for reducing the time scale of design cycles, which is a major challenge for future innovation to integrate marine energy and observing platforms. The proposed solutions include linking marine energy and ocean observing developer communities, improving access to affordable and accessible testing sites, and last but not least, less emails, more time for collaborative, creative, deep thinking. Well, maybe while surfing. And they also invite you to visit the link and learn more about the newly announced Powering Blue Economy Ocean Observing Prize. That was the last set of recommendations. Please give another round of applause for the breakout session leaders for their hard work, for special session leaders, and also for all who participated and contributed to breakout session. And next, I would like to invite to the scene Jan and John, who will start the integration day. Thank you.
Okay, I got about 5 minutes here to try and cover one question that keeps coming up and some announcements. First of all, the question, which is what will happen after this conference with all your work? In 2009, well, let me back up just a minute, a special thing about Ocean Obs is the connection between the observer community and the sponsors. And we've maintained that here at this conference. We've brought the sponsors along. They're in the audience. They're in the sessions. We interviewed all the sponsoring organizations before the meeting to find out what they were interested in sponsoring. And in Ocean Obs 09, the framework committee that put together the document, the Framework for Ocean Observing, was a group of people who were nominated by the sponsors. And so they were receptive to hearing and being briefed on the framework when it was completed, and it gave it its power. And it has been used in implementation of deep ocean, in the Atlantic, in the tropical Pacific, and so on. So it's a powerful mechanism that we have in Ocean Obs. So the way forward, we've collected all the community white paper recommendations, all this material from the breakouts, and so on. And Slido is a rich resource for us. We're staffed to try and integrate that information. And what I would like to do is, once again, get a representative committee from our community nominated by the sponsors to work through this action plan that we create from all this material. And then we will brief it back to the sponsors and see what corresponds between what the sponsors want and what's in the action plan. And this will lead, I believe, to continuing and growing investments. So this partnership, which we have in Ocean Obs between you, the observer community, and the sponsor community, will continue. So that's the way forward. There's so many different ways that things get funded in different countries that I'm not going in that direction. We have to just continue the conversation. I know that one of the universal things is that agencies who fund us are science-driven and requirements-driven. And so having the voice of the scientific community in Ocean Obs and stating things in terms of what's required resonates with sponsors just about everywhere. So that's the plan going forward. So now let me get to maybe more important things for you. Is today is Luau Day. The luau tonight is at the Hilton Hawaiian Village in the Great Lawn area down next to the lagoon. It starts at 6:30. Be sure to wear your green wristband and your badge here. You must wear both to gain entry, and we will not be able to issue badges or luau wristbands on site at the Hilton. So please plan accordingly. a reminder for all the poster session poster owners. This is the last poster session this afternoon, and you need to take your posters down by 6:30 tonight if you want to keep them. Any poster remaining after 6:30 tonight will be removed and recycled. We will not be able to return any posters on Friday, and the exhibit hall will only be accessible to the exhibitors as they take down the exhibits on Friday. The morning break on Friday will move back up here from the poster hall. And then if you're leaving tomorrow and you want to bring your luggage here, the convention center doesn't have a luggage locker. So we're asking everybody, if you must bring your luggage with you tomorrow, to leave it at the back of the ballroom here. And so not at the front desk or anywhere else. You bring it up here and put it in the ballroom. Finally, about the luau tonight, late arrivers at the meeting, many were unable to register and get luau tickets because if we kept giving out luau tickets, there would not be enough food for everybody. What a popular conference we have. So if you're unable to attend the luau tonight and you have a green wristband in your badge, please give it to me. Give it to the paddle man. And I will help get the people who want to attend but don't have a wristband use. So we make the maximum use of the wristband. So find me with the paddle, and I know you'll miss a big event, but I know you all have, families and other things that you may want to do. So thank you very much for your attention. If you have questions about the long tail of ocean obs after the meeting, I'm happy to try and answer your questions. It's always a work in progress, this work between ocean obs and the sponsors, and we need your continuing engagement. Thank you.
Aloha. Good morning. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Integration Day. My name's Jan Newton. I'm from the University of Washington.
And good morning. I'm John Sidorn. I'm from the Met Office in the UK. And Jan just stole the thing I wanted to do, which was aloha. That's great. Thank you.
He did it better, didn't you think? Yeah, he did. Anyways, so if I could have the first slide, we're going to take you to the integration theme. And here's the clicker. Okay, great. So integration. What do we mean by integration? Do we mean geographic integration, local to global, making sure that we are truly a global observing system? Do we mean disciplinary, making sure that it's physics, biogeochemical, biology, and maybe even focused on human impacts? Do we mean data, so that we have the ability to integrate data from observations with models, from different data sets to integrate those? Do we mean knowledge, different sources of knowledge, academic, indigenous practices, best practices? Well, yes, we mean all of that. And so integration is a big topic, and it's going to be a big day for that. So oftentimes when we talk about ocean observing systems, we talk about integration across end-to-end system. And that was kind of conceived of because we knew that we wanted observations that were going to fulfill certain purposes. You hear the term fit for purpose. And it kind of looks like this. You hear the end-to-end or the logic chain or the value chain. So you see users, observations, data, products, boom. But John and I discussed it, and we don't think the chain is the right thing to be thinking about. We think it's a circle. Because once you create those products, it's really important to come back and connect with the users, that this circle shows that connection. And on day one, the flash talk for integration was by Melissa Iwamoto, and she gave us this great circle, which had the 3 steps for connecting with users and developing processes. And you see number 3 is iterative engagement. So this is how we're thinking of integration, is that there's an awful lot of connectivity, connections through all of those things. So that's a big thing, but so is the ocean, and so that's our job in front of us. If you look at the framework for ocean observing, the FOO, you see that actually it has that connection, right? Those little gray things between issues and issue impact through observations. But we're thinking that those 2 little gray lines might need a little bit more love, a little bit more fleshing out, and that's what we're really excited to do with you.
So yeah, that, as Jan's just said, that's a huge subject, integration across all sorts of elements. So what are we hoping to do today? Well, we want to get some outcomes, of course. This is not just a talking shop. We really want to achieve something today. But we're very aware that we're only going to be taking a step on the way. But we really want to be able to point ourselves in the direction of how do we better share ocean observing information. And that means across the normal sort of existing users, the existing people we normally share our information with or our data with, but also the new users, the potential users that by becoming more open we may well open ourselves up to. It's a big theme of this conference, and I guess one of the reasons it's here in Hawaii is we've got to be thinking about underrepresented communities and regions where there's a lot of critical needs. So the Pacific Islands are clearly an area where that's very true, and we want to make sure that integration includes that axis of engaging across communities and regions. So today we really want to articulate the ways that we're going to enhance access and benefits, and it's an easy thing to say, but how do we really do that? And I think hopefully at the end of the day we might have some insight into that. We're also, as probably most communities are, we have our own silos, we have our own friends, we like to talk with the people that talk the same way as we do, and I think a really important theme of today and for this whole week is really down to how do we reduce those silos, how do we break down those barriers to make sure we can make the most of what we're doing, we can really maximize our impact. And that means breaking down barriers between subject matter experts across the natural sciences, which is something I think we're reasonably used to thinking about now, but perhaps of course across global, regional and coastal scale sort of silos as well. And it's not written here, of course, but we're really looking to extend our interactions with other sciences, so not just the natural sciences, but beyond.
Thank you. So we really want to emphasize the community white papers and to provide you with a short synthesis of that. We really thank so many of you who participated in this process. It's essential to what we are trying to do here. So this is the word cloud or word shark, I guess it is, for the community white paper synthesis for integration. You see capacity, you see knowledge, you see integrate. And you see a lot of other little words, which is really critical here because there are a lot of other facets that these papers pulled together. So here are some of the lead authors for the integration papers. Integration community white papers by far and away were the majority of the 140. This list was compiled, and I know it's not 100% accurate, so apologies to you if you feel your paper should be here. But you can see the different categories, which I can't. Networks, governance, and data systems. And I have glasses, that's really disappointing. So what we want to do is to take a moment and pull in the highlights from these community white papers addressing integration. All right, here you see the key issues. And you can see integration, so engaging with stakeholders and traditional knowledge. I think that this is an overwhelming theme that I'm very proud that Ocean Obs 19 is really highlighting and pulling out. Integrating local through global scales. This is something in my work with ocean acidification and the Global OA Observing Network, I'm always harping on local through global scales, because with an issue like ocean acidification, you can't understand the local situation unless it's in the global context, and we can't understand our global signature unless it's the composite, the mosaic of those smaller local pictures as well put it together. Geographical balance and to build capacity. The ocean touches all shorelines, and yet our ocean observing capacity is lacking in some of those areas. We really need to focus our attention in getting the global south and other places where there needs capacity to build that so we have a more complete picture. Assured data interoperability. This isn't my specialty, but there's so many experts here that know in order to make things interoperable, the machine-to-machine connectivity that we are capable of and needs to be enhanced, as well as being able to see different disciplines, different types of data. Engage industry and innovation. We had an awesome day yesterday discussing that and integrating that into our aspects. Be responsive to emerging needs. Marine heat waves are getting more and more frequent. There's one happening off my state of Washington that's really gathering our attention, and the last one was only a few years away. Emerging needs. And lastly, observe the full system and really think about that word system and how, what we want to know, are we asking ourselves the things that will allow us to see that?
So Jan and I obviously have glasses issues. I've printed off everything big so I can see everything. My eyesight's getting bad at the long-sighted stage. So we had a large number of papers, as already been mentioned, and one of the things that's I think has been really useful as part of the preparation for this conference has been the collation of the information from those community white papers. We had a really lot of help with that, so it's been great. And I don't want to go through everything here in detail, but this sort of detail has been pulled out of the papers and is being synthesized at the moment. So the recommendations that came out of these papers were that we really need to focus on collaboration, and collaboration means converging around global challenges and objectives, and the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement were mentioned as a way of sort of energizing the community around a common ambition. Engagement is obviously key to all of this stuff, so we need to increase stakeholder engagement. And the statement is along the whole marine value chain, the knowledge value chain, but I think, as we discussed, that's possibly the wrong way to look at it. We need to ensure that there's ownership and commitment to this through the process of ocean observing, and we need to incorporate this the local and indigenous peoples and their knowledge. That's a key element of this engagement. Scale's been mentioned already. We've really got to work from the local to the global scale. This is something I feel very, very strongly about, particularly in maybe the modelling communities, but I'm sure it's also true in the observational communities, that there are global communities and there are local communities, coastal communities, and they don't really necessarily interact, and that really needs to change in the future. And there's a suggestion that we need to establish ambassadors to coordinate among these different international governing bodies to bring things more closely together. There's got to be continuity, of course, and there's highlighted here the guidelines for best practice. These really got to be a consistent set of best practices, set up the future ocean observing system. And then finally, for this set of recommendations, there was an awful lot of good information on how we might take forward capacity building. And certainly that's something that is hopefully going to really come out of this conference, how we take that further. And then continuing through the categories of recommendations from these really excellent papers, we had some recommendations on data. And I think this is probably the axis in which most people think of integration. It's sort of the easy one to think about in some senses, but perhaps very hard to do. And that's, of course, around the interoperability and integration of new and existing data sets. The FAIR principles, the findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable principles are clearly very important. And I would add to that, of course, timeliness is key for many, many applications. So ensuring that the appropriate timeliness is associated with the data sets is key. Ensuring that we have appropriate metadata so that people using the data can really understand how to use it is obviously a thing that needs to be improved on and extended. And technology development, we talked a lot about new technologies, so I won't go into that in detail, but of course we need to integrate across the different technologies. And then we have emerging needs and perhaps the classic thing, improved observations across a range of different data types, so biogeochemistry, ecology, thinking about higher resolutions. We're now looking at having to really solve the next problem at scales of the mesoscale. We're sort of doing the broad scale reasonably well, I would say, but we've already heard a lot about moving down to higher resolutions yesterday. And of course, going deeper in the ocean. So there's really a wealth of information and really nice ideas within those community white papers that we really need to take advantage of over the next 10 years.
So John and I are thrilled to have the panelists we have before you today. We have some rock stars and who represent a large diversity. We have international experts, Tim Moltmann from Australia, the director of IMOS, an ocean observing system. We have Claire Joly from France and the OECD, and they just took it away, so my cheat notes are gone, who is working at an intergovernmental organization on economic and policy development. We have Bennett Atu Foley from the University of Ghana, who is an oceanographer and who spends a lot of time working on data products, data training, and outreach. And we have Kitty Simons, who I'm so happy to invite back onto the stage, who is here at the Western Pacific Regional Fishery Management Council in Hawaii, who works on resource management in innovative ways. We'll be introducing them each, but I wanted to pull out for you the great diversity of locations and expertise with respect to the theme of integration. So without further ado, I will turn it over to John, who will introduce Tim. And we are going to ask that you make sure that you give your questions on Slido. We are going to hold questions until the end, until we've heard from all four of our panelists. And what we would really like to engender is a discussion with questions that maybe apply to one or more of the panelists, so our discussion can be more integrated and less specific on any one thing that they said. So we look forward to your questions, and back to you, John.
Is this mic working? Yes, it is. Okay. Hello again. Yeah, so we've already had a brief introduction to all the panelists. Tim is our first speaker, Tim Moltmann. He's listed here as Director of Australia's Integrated Marine Observing System, IMOS, although I believe that is in the process of handing over. Correct. And that, I mean, from my perspective, IMOS is an exemplar of how a nation might be able to manage its observing network. So it'd be really interesting to hear his views on leading a large, successful national collaborative research infrastructure program. So over to you, Tim.
Thank you, John, and good morning. I really appreciate the opportunity to do this. So what I'd like to do is talk about the topic of integration from the perspective of a national marine observing system. Oh, that one. Right, there's two green ones. So I'll just briefly introduce IMOS, and I'll talk about it as a regional alliance of the global ocean observing system, or reflect on the 10 years that we've had since OceanObs 09, and I'll talk particularly about things like setting requirements around observations coordination from national to global scales, data and information, And you'll recognise those terms, any of you who've had a look at the Framework for Ocean Observing developed at Ocean Obs 09. And then I really want to talk about where we think we need to go next around planning for use and impact, and then I'll just share a few lessons that I think we've learned across the last decade. It's a national system. The core funding for this program comes from Australian government, and we greatly appreciate the support that we get for that. It's a collaborative system. As you would be aware, Australia is a very large country with a large ocean territory, the third largest on the planet, but a relatively small population. And the only way we can implement something like this is bringing our strongest institutions from around the country together into a single system. And you would recognise a number of the brands in that logo cloud. And finally, it's a research infrastructure. That's something that's quite distinctive about this. Our mission is to undertake systematic and sustained observing of Australia's vast and valuable marine environment and turn that into data that can be openly used for science research, teaching and other purposes. But our core mission is to support research. As I said, it's part of the Global Ocean Observing System. We're very proud, I think, in about 2014, to have been approved by UNESCO IOC to be the 13th and most recent regional alliance of the Global Ocean Observing System. And we benefit hugely from that. Australia, if you look at it from a land perspective, is a pretty isolated place. But by working in this way, we can really connect ourselves into the world. So that map, the yellow mist would be Argo profiles, the orange lines are ship of opportunity lines, the green ones are tracked elephant and Weddell seals, the red dots show our national mooring network on our shelf and coastal waters. So you can see that by working in this way, we can make our footprint in the global ocean can be quite significant. We can contribute to the global system, and we benefit hugely from that international collaboration. So IMOS is a fairly new system in 2009 when Ocean Obs was held in Venice, and we're very much benefited, I think, from the development of the Framework for Ocean Observing, and it's really helped to guide the development of our system over the ensuing decade. And I'm very pleased to be standing here today saying that our system's in pretty good shape here at Ocean Obs 19, and we're very much looking forward to engaging with further development of the Global Ocean Observing System strategy out to 2030. And in fact, we're in the fortunate position to be planning at national level out on the same time frame. So setting requirements. As I said before, this has been funded as a research infrastructure, so it's quite appropriate, I think, that we started with science plans. We organised our community into a series of nodes and we wrote science plans, and in fact we put them out to international peer review. A number of people in this room would have contributed to that process some years ago. So we had an open ocean node. Australia is a federation of states, so it's very important that we bring that perspective to bear. The responsibility for managing Australian waters is shared between our federal and state governments, so we need to think in that way. And also our research communities live in these places. We have a community on the West Coast, we have communities in North Queensland, and we need to engage them all in what we're trying to do. The other thing that's been important for us, and I think it's quite relevant to this session, is what we call the IONOMOS. It is called an Integrated Marine Observing System, and for us that means two important things. Firstly, we are trying to integrate across scales, so our system's going from open ocean onto shelf and into coast, and we're trying to integrate across the disciplines, physics, biology, chemistry, and biology. That's led us to design, build, implement, and sustain a system that looks like this. And we fund a series of facilities that collect the observations, and those things would be familiar to, or I would say, all of you in this room, but I think something that is distinctive about what we've done is we've got quite a lot in the chocolate box. I think we've done pretty well with that. So I really want to talk about how we coordinated that, and I'll emphasise three things. First of all, we're doing things that are part of international programs. We're very much embedded into those. So with our partners at CSIRO and other partners, we do about 10% of the Global Argo program. So we're able to bring our capability in the Southern Hemisphere to bear to that global program, but we benefit hugely. We get 100% of the data to work on. Our deep water moorings would sit in the Ocean Sites program. Our ships of opportunity programs, things like XBTs, SC fluxes, continuous plankton recorders and so on, they're all nested in the relevant global programs. And with satellite remote sensing, Australia doesn't have a domestic capability, so we're extremely grateful for the satellite observations that the international missions take. But one thing we can do is undertake high precision calibration and validation activities in our region to make those products better and to enable uptake and use in our region. Secondly, we're very strong supporters of engaging with the emerging global networks. It's clear to us that, when I think 10 years ago, the Global Ocean Observing System set out to move from physics to climate to, if you would think, maybe marine systems for society. To do that, we're going to have to bring a lot of new networks into the system. And a number of us in regional alliances are actually operating these things now. So we think we have a strong contribution to make in helping to bring things like ocean gliders, ocean radars and animal-borne instrumentation into the system. We're experienced in operating these things now. Thirdly, I think in a few areas we're probably at the leading edge of observations coordination. We have a continental scale benthic monitoring system using AUVs, and we've recently expanded that excuse me, to include a very successful citizen diver program called Reef Life Survey that's run by our colleagues at the University of Tasmania. We have, I think, with our animal tracking work, we've really organised that well now into a national network. We have, I think, of order 80 million detections of 135 species, and we're now really working with the people that fund fisheries and threatened species research and manage those things to have our network better meeting their needs. We have a representative network of moorings around the Australian shelf and coast, and we've been able to use that to build into new areas. So we're actually setting up a continental scale microbiome initiative to characterise the Australian marine microbiome, and we're hoping with new funding to start to get into, move from characterisation, if you like, into function. All of our data is discoverable, accessible, usable and reusable through the Australian Ocean Data Network, and I cannot stress how, or understate how important this has been. And we've put about 10% of our investment into building this infrastructure, and we've maintained that through time. So it's a large investment, but we do not regret this in any way. You know, one thing I would say is that about 70% of the investment going into that is to maintain that system. So and about 30% goes into sort of doing new things. So that's something you've got to think about when you do this. Importantly, what we've tried to do is not just expose the IMOS data through this system, but to bring in other data collections where we have custodians who want to participate with this. And so we're pleased to see now that 50% of the 250 odd collections in that are contributed by other partners. We think this is starting to work really well. And then we do try and turn that data into some value-added products, so I think that's something we need to do more of into the future. So for example, all of our real-time data is mapped on a daily basis through Ocean Current, and that's used by fishermen like it, swimmers, yachts people. Our National Research Vessel investigator is out at sea at the moment, turning around our East Australian current moorings, and they're very much using this to target their sampling into eddies. Looking forward, we think that what we've started to do in the next little while is what we call plan for use and impact. So rather than, we think our stories around use and impact are good, but it's largely come from what we've done and how we've done it. And we really think that where we need to go next is to plan for that and measure ourselves against it. So we'll build on that strong underpinning of scientific planning, but we think much more clearly about the social, economic, legal and policy drivers, and really start to build that into the way we design and implement our system. So that's led us to these 5 societal benefit areas that we're focusing on, and sort of 3 major thrusts of research, if you like, not just climate research, but certainly strong research around ocean management and to support operational services as well. And it's interesting that having taken ourselves through that analysis, it aligns quite well with both our National Marine Science Plan that we have in Australia, but also the new Goose Strategy 2030. So we think we're on a pretty good path with that. So just to give you an example, if we think about Argo, which we would classically have thought of as a tool for climate research, if there's going to be any skill in decadal forecasting for farmers in rural Australia, that's going to come from the ocean. Because Argo gives us a real-time data stream, it can inform operational forecasting that's used by many marine industries and our own Navy on a daily basis. And also Argo is going to measure thermal expansion in the global ocean, which is a major contribution to sea level for coastal communities. That's an observation I can sell. So in closing, 3 lessons learned. I think maintain an unrelenting focus on data quality and data availability. This is the niche of the observing system in my view. We need to move up the value chain through partnerships with modelling and forecasting groups and those people doing analysis and assessments. The observing system cannot do this alone, and most of the stakeholders that I talk to, they're very happy to know what's happened up till now, but they really want to know what's going to happen next, and we can only do that by partnering with the modelling and forecasting communities. And finally, I do think we need to bring socioeconomics policy and law into the design of the future system. We need to move from using it to justify our biophysical requirements, and we need to bring it into the determination of what we do. That's me, thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim. Our next panelist is Claire Joly. She's the head of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development's Directorate for Science Space Forum. There's a lot of different terms there.
I can give you the best stuff if you want.
And I'm just going to say she has experience in policy and economic analysis, having worked for both public and private organizations in aerospace and defense in Europe and North America.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Claire Joly. I'm with the OECD. It's an international economic organization, and I work in the Directorate for Science, Technology, and Innovation. I'm an economist and an engineer by training, so multidisciplinary is basically my daily life. And I'm here today because I head at the OECD a program on the ocean economy. We've done a lot of work trying to map what the ocean economy represents, as to provide some evidence to our policymakers so that they actually support economic activities, but in a very sustainable way. And one of the major lessons learned of a recent exercise that we led on sizing up, measuring up the ocean economy is that the economic activities today are actually in a path of really, and you know that, destroying our marine environment. So business as usual is not an option for the future. So we've been tasked at the OECD to actually explore a number of solutions and what could we do to actually enhance the sustainability of the ocean economy. And one of these solutions is to look at, obviously, research and innovation. Here, I'm very happy to be in this panel, as I will be presenting here a bit of a different angle. We have 3 presenters that will provide some information on their ocean observing system and how integration with users, stakeholders from many different parts from local, regional to national stakeholders will actually be enhanced. Here, I'm providing you with a bit of a different view. The challenge that we have here is how can we balance needs, capabilities, and knowledge worldwide. That's clearly a major challenge. Here I'm going to focus more on how the ocean observing community can engage new actors and ensure a more balanced transfer of information and technology. And to do this, I'm going to share with you some lessons learned from an exercise that we led last year on what we call the research and innovation networks in the ocean economy. Some of the actors that I'm going to mention, you know them very well, but what's important here is that the ocean observing community can actually link up with many stakeholders quite easily. I'll come to that. I'll first give you a brief context for what we've done here on these research and innovation networks. At the OECD, we publish every 2 years an outlook on STI. Where is STI going? And clearly, there are many changes happening. You see this probably from day to day in terms of the adoption of disruptive technologies and new collaborative and open innovation mechanisms. One, I think, important item here is, well, 2 important items are listed here on this slide, and that came up actually during the sessions we had since the beginning of the conference. This moved to a lot of transdisciplinary research where we're seeing the needs and the advantages of actually linking up different communities, and this co-creation with an important role for actually industry players more and more. Now, this is just to make the case for these science-industry relationships. Over half in over half of the OECD countries, 50% of the researchers are in business enterprises. There's a lot of research here to tap into. Now, in terms of how organizations collaborate, we see a lot of innovation there. It's not new. You know, we had industry clusters forever. Some of your oceanographic centers have been doing collaboration, obviously, with many stakeholders for many years. But we are going now into a more networked innovation, I would say. And that translates in the ocean domain with changing patterns of collaboration in terms of the fact that the ocean space is getting smaller, in a way. More disciplines are getting together. But there are also advancements in research that are leading to new fields to explore. We have some great sessions on eDNA, for instance. What we're seeing now is that indeed actors are starting to come together and develop what we call here the Ocean Economy Innovation Networks. So what we did is that the OECD is very much an evidence-based organization. We conducted a survey. And again, I thank all the different organizations here that participated to our survey. We had the Ocean Frontier Institute, we had Wendy Watson-Wright, who talked yesterday. We talked to colleagues from different parts of the world, from Ireland, Norway, Portugal. In the UK, it was at the National Oceanography Centre with their Marine Autonomous and Robotic Systems Innovation Centre. All these centers are actually pushing for new networks. And these networks around specific areas of activities that I'm going to go into have been all established quite recently, even though, of course, again, they build on past projects. The network partner organization types include public research institutes, universities, but also a majority of SMEs and large companies that are getting involved in very dedicated projects that are funded by national innovation funds, research funds, but also more and more industry funds. And all the work is governed usually by industry and scientific committees. So you would say, well, okay, these different centers and their networks are working on very different areas. Over half of them are doing specifically work on ocean monitoring, involving more and more researchers that are doing ocean observations. But they are also looking at some of the very active, I would say, domains of the ocean economy in terms of ocean energy, aquaculture, fisheries, and developing a range of new and advanced technologies. All these links to clearly important items that we need to actually deliver information on to our policymakers in terms of some of the environmental and coastal management, maritime safety and security, and some of these other domains that I mentioned here that are actually requested. Governments are requesting a lot of information on these different domains. Although they're very different, the network centers, I would say here, have some similar functions. And one of the key functions is really in facilitating access to the research facilities of the different members. We heard in different sessions that to get to demonstrations, it takes sometimes quite a bit of time to be able actually to get everything organized and getting allocation sites. These innovation networks, I would say, are really working on this. And this allows not only SMEs to actually access testing sites, but also researchers to access industrial testing sites. So this is, I think, an important item here in terms of the activities of these network centers. But they do face some challenges in terms of balancing commerce with science, definitely. One way to go around that is to actually build up the right intellectual property rights in the different projects and making sure that some of the scientific goals are actually better known to some of the industry players there. In terms of the benefits, as I mentioned, many of the projects that are actually conducted via these innovation networks are funded by national funds. And there are a lot of impact assessment studies that need to be conducted along the way. But they tend to suggest, indeed, a number of positive impacts. And clearly, in terms of building scientific capacity, knowledge, and retaining skills, some of these networks are actually providing some interesting benefits. And beyond that, an important factor is in terms of diffusing knowledge even beyond, I would say, the typical actors that you have in your own close networks. Now, the way ahead, coming back to the question on this integration of ocean observation systems. And here again, I'm not talking about the integration of a given observation systems with its users, stakeholders, making sure that everybody benefits for this particular observing system and link up with other observing systems. I'm talking here about actually getting even other players involved. I think there's a conversation, and it always takes some opportunity costs to actually spend time. An opportunity that I'm seeing here is that many of the research centers that I mentioned have actually trying to expand more and more the communities around them, including actors from the IT industry, for instance, bringing them in. So I think it's useful to think of this and start conversations beyond your immediate circles. So this presentation was a bit different. I hope it will give you some food for thought, maybe also provide you with some incentives to actually think a bit differently with the science industry partnerships that can be put in place. So with this, I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. It's really useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire, for a really thought-provoking talk there and giving us a slightly different perspective. Before we move on to the next speaker, please keep your questions coming. Jan and I are having a great deal of fun at the front here, reading through them and thinking through what some of them mean and how to act on them. So please keep them coming and voting. So while you're looking down at your phones and thinking about that, I will introduce our next speaker. It's Bennett Atsufolu from the University of Ghana. He has actually a very similar career profile to me in some respects because he's responsible for the development of products and services. He's an oceanographer doing that, and I believe has some experience in providing services through GMES Africa, which is a great example of integration, I would say. He's got a lot of experience in developing training materials on using information on physical ocean conditions and coastal vulnerability services, and he leads on operationalizing a lot of the services for his region, including working with local fishermen and other communities. So look forward to hearing what you have to say about it.
Thank you very much. Aloha.
Aloha.
Yeah. So my name is Bennett Foley from the University of Ghana, and this morning I want to take you through the products and services that we generate at the University of Ghana through the GMES and Africa project. And first of all, I'd like to use the opportunity to thank you for the nice introduction and also thank the organizing committee for putting this wonderful program together and bringing me here to talk. Thank you. So this is the overview of my talk. It's a brief talk, and mainly I'm going to talk about the products, the services that we are providing the West African coastal communities on using satellite data or satellite information or Earth observation information to monitor marine and coastal resources in West Africa. So West Africa is endowed with a lot of marine and coastal resources, and these resources are important for the livelihoods of the local communities and other beneficiaries. It is also important for building resilience, for instance, for climate change, and also it provides economic growth for the countries that are involved. And so with a very large EEZ, that's exclusive economic zones or shelf, continental shelf, this provides a lot of marine and coastal resources to these countries. But with all these resources that we have, there are lots of challenges that we face. Key of these challenges is IUU, illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing, where people steal the fish from us through various means. And it's been reported that in West Africa alone, IUU cost the region about $7 billion a year. And this poses a lot of challenge. It causes loss of employment to the people and loss of revenue. And from the map you can see down below, you see the IUU, the rate of IUU in various countries, and somewhere around Ghana in West Africa, you see that it's a very big challenge. The next challenge is lack of early warning information for our local fishermen, artisanal fishermen. So our local fishermen use these kind of boats, the canoes, very, very small and dangerous out at sea. And what they do is they usually go to sea, stay there for 2, 3, sometimes up to 4 or 5 days fishing. And these people usually rely on their local knowledge to navigate and also to locate fish and also to forecast the weather, which has a lot of errors in it. So what they need is a source of accurate and reliable information for their work so that they will not perish at sea when there is weather disaster. The other challenge is with coastal erosion. Our coasts are being washed away through erosion. Communities are being lost, livelihoods are being lost, people are losing their homes, and so it's a big challenge. Erosion is a big thing. The rate of erosion is very high along the coast of West Africa. And so these key challenges, we're trying to find means of resolving them and helping the people. So to help mitigate these challenges, there have been some initiatives in the past, and these include the PUMA project, that is preparation for use of Meteosat second generation in Africa, and MSD program, followed by the MSD program, which is the African Monitoring for Sustainable Development. And also recently ended is the MESA program, that is the Monitoring for Environment and Security in Africa. And what we are running now is the GMES and Africa program. GMES standing for the Global Monitoring for Environment and Security and Africa. So the security here, it does not refer to weapons, but rather it refers to food security. And the main objective of all these initiatives, together with the GMES and Africa program, is to provide decision makers with Earth observation tools and information to be able to manage their resources very well. And this is to address three key challenges, that is availability of data and information, human and institutional capacities, and also utilization of the information by decision makers to manage the resource. And for the West African Consortium running the marine and coastal services, we have 8 partners running the services in 12 coastal countries. So for the University of Ghana, the services that we provide are mainly 5. The first one being the generation of potential fishing zone charts which are overlaid with vessel tracks, and also monitoring and forecasting of oceanographic variables. You also have forecasting of ocean conditions, and this product is disseminated via SMS to the local fishermen so that they are able to receive early warning information prior to going to sea. The fourth service is to monitor coastal vulnerability using satellite data to look at erosion change rates and which areas of the coast are vulnerable to destruction. The final one is coastal ecosystem mapping, where we look at mangrove vegetation, land use, land change. So for the first service, we use forecast products as well as satellite product to generate maps like this, potential fishing zone maps, where you have the green areas indicating high potentials of finding fish, and the light areas indicating light potential of finding fish. And the black dots you see in the map are areas where fishing activities are being undertaken. So these products are sent to the managers to be able to focus the meager resource that they have on monitoring the system. The other one is providing forecast and monitoring information on physical and biological ocean variables. This is generally to all users who are interested, including researchers. And at the end of the month, we generate bulletins for the public. The third one covers sending of SMS messages to fishermen. Now, we realize that the fishermen will not be able to go to the website to explore all the resources or the products that we have there. So we channel it into a simple text message by generating indices from forecast data and indices of 1, 2, and 3, representing ocean conditions of calm, rough, and dangerous, respectively. And we have communicated with them to also use flags to represent these ocean conditions, so that anybody who does not receive this message is able to look at the flags that are mounted at the beaches to indicate the conditions prior to going to sea. The fourth service is on using satellite data to generate erosion change maps and vulnerability maps. As you can see, the map in the picture indicates certain sections of the Ghanaian coast where we have very vulnerable areas and low vulnerable areas. And this product is given to managers to be able to focus their attention on those places that are very vulnerable to protect the coast. The fifth service uses also satellite data to generate maps of changes in coastal vegetation, mangroves, so that you know which areas are being well affected, and then for management decision to be taken. So all this data that we've been using, a lot of it, most of it, comes from the EU Copernicus program, which was also known, was known to be the GMES program, now the Copernicus program. And this is the same strategy we are adopting in the GMES and Africa program. And other data sets come from NOAA and other local sources. We also focus on strengthening capacity to be able to use these data sets for decision making. And we have collaborated with UMESAT, IOC, UNESCO, and also JRC in Italy to develop capacity. We also create awareness to people, decision makers, local users, communities, to be able to use these products effectively. So we also share a lot of data among the network, among the countries, using simple equipment like the GeoNetcast station, which does not require internet. Internet is a lot challenge in the region, and so we come out with using this equipment to be able to send data, to share data with all our partners without the use of internet, although you can connect internet to it. So the lessons learned in executing the previous initiatives and also the current one include working directly with institutions that have the mandate to manage the marine and coastal resources so that we wouldn't be wasting effort. And then other ones is to diversify our training strategies. We have online training platforms, and also we go on site to the institutions to develop their capacity in maintaining the equipment that are given them, and also to be able to access data, analyze the data, and make sense out of the data. And we also have communication strategies to communicate to various stakeholders, the decision maker, and also the fisherman at the beach. In conclusion, the services that we provide has been helping in policy and decision making, in managing the marine resources, providing early warning information also, and building capacity of the indigenous people, as well as making data accessible to all the people in the region. We also collaborate. We want to be collaborating with other institutions in terms of capacity development and also in-situ data collection to be able to validate our product very well. Mahalo. Thank you.
Thank you, Bennett. Mahalo, very impressive. Our final panelist is Kitty Simons. She has been the executive director of the Western Pacific Regional Fishery Management Council since 1983. She's a native of Maui, as we learned on Monday. Under her direction, the council has successfully undertaken innovative marine resource management and done a lot of pioneering in terms of how that management has been taken. Over to you.
Thank you, Jan. So, aloha kakahiaka, which is good morning. It has been a week packed with ponderous presentations. So to begin with lighter fare, I will start with a children's story based on the case of the missing lobsters by Dr. Jeffrey Polovina, the former chief scientist of the Ecosystem and Oceanography Division of the NOAA Pacific Islands Fishery Science Center. The story begins in 1989 with Dr. Polovina advising anxious lobstermen on the harvest of spiny lobster in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. Overfishing is the obvious reason for a low catch in this season, he said. But don't worry, lobsters will be back next year. The next year, when the lobsters did not return, Dr. Polovina was under pressure to find the real reasons for the missing lobsters. He told his story to a seabird biologist. She said the reproductive success of some seabirds had significantly dropped since 1985, and it could be from lack of food. He spoke with a marine mammal expert and a coral reef ecologist. They said monk seal pup survival rates and coral reef numbers had both declined. He then spoke with a physical oceanographer who said he had traced exceptionally high sea levels in the central and eastern North Pacific and the extension of warm surface water. The intensity and position of the Aleutian low corresponded to both of these ocean features. The story concludes with Dr. Polovina returning to the fishermen. I have good news and bad news. Overfishing did not cause a decline in lobster catches. That's the good news. The bad news is that unless the Aleutian low strengthened again, lobster catch will remain poor. Dr. Polovina's findings are found in several scientific publications, including the Bulletin of Marine Science. They highlight the importance of integrating marine ecosystem and climate observations into the fishery management process. When the Pacific-wide regime shift took place in the North Pacific in 1989, the Western Pacific Regional Fishery Management Council was managing the northwestern Hawaiian Islands lobster and other federally managed fisheries through species-based fishery plans. These plans for pelagic, bottomfish, crustaceans, and precious corals fisheries cover the entire Western Pacific region, including Hawaii, American Samoa, Guam, the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas, and the 8 U.S. Pacific uninhabited islands. In the late 1990s, the Council began to change its approach from species-based to ecosystem-based. It finalized its coral reef ecosystem fishery plan in 2001, and in 2005 to 2007, It organized a series of workshops on implementing ecosystem-based management. Nearly 100 experts participated in these workshops on science and management, social science, and policy. The Council's publication, Ecosystem-Based Fisheries Management in the Western Pacific, published by Wiley-Blackwell, provides an overview of the workshops. In 2010, the Council restructured its 5 species-based fishery plans into place-based ecosystem plans for the archipelagic fisheries of the U.S. Pacific Islands and the uninhabited islands and the Pacific pelagic fishery. This ecosystem-based approach increased the issues under the Council's consideration to include climate change, bycatch, forage fish, protected species, marine debris, and non-fishing impacts such as pollution, nutrient loading, and ocean acidification. This in turn elevated the need for more access to observations and information and a wider array of partners, hence the creation of 4 regional ecosystem advisory committees to provide a forum for government agencies, organizations, and other entities to share information to better integrate and coordinate ocean and coastal management. The Council also created a Marine Planning and Climate Change Committee with representatives from federal and state agencies and local communities. The committee's efforts included education and outreach and culminated in a series of Train the Trainer sessions conducted in each of the islands. The Council's archipelagic and pelagic plan teams eventually absorbed the responsibilities of the Marine Planning and Climate Change Committee. The plan teams include scientists from the Regional Office of the National Marine Fisheries Service, the Pacific Islands Fisheries Science Center, other federal agencies, and the local agencies of the U.S. Pacific Islands. These scientists assist in the development and monitoring of the Council's management plans. The teams include experts in climate, coral ecology, economics, ecosystems, oceanography, protected species, and human dimensions, and social science. In addition to engaging a wider array of scientists and resource managers, the Council's move to ecosystem-based management included increased collaboration with fishermen and indigenous communities within our jurisdiction and elsewhere in the United States. Workshops were conducted by the National Marine Fisheries Service involving Hawaii bottom fishermen, the Pacific Islands Science Center, the Council, that resulted in improved stock assessments. The fishermen at those workshops stressed the importance of factors such as wind and currents on fishery performance, and the scientists listened. The Council organized a series of conferences in Hawaii that resulted in a structure for indigenous consultation in natural resource management, as well as the state of Hawaii's official recognition of the traditional ahamoku system as a best practice. A summary of the conference series can be found in Tradition-Based Natural Resource Management, published this year by Palgrave Macmillan. The Council continues to work with indigenous communities and educational institutions in our region to elicit and convey traditional knowledge about local fishery ecosystems. The Council collaborates with them on research, workshops, student activities, and the production of traditional lunar calendars. Besides widening our sphere of collaboration, restructuring to an ecosystem-based approach has significantly changed the way the Council monitors and evaluates fisheries. Each year, the Council produces annual reports with major contributions from the plan teams. And when the Council managed through species-based plans, the annual reports monitored and evaluated the fishery performance based on principles on fishery factors, such as catch and effort. Following the restructuring, each report now monitors ecosystem considerations such as socioeconomics, protected species, climate and oceanic indicators, essential fish habitat, and marine planning. The reports also analyze the relationship between ecosystem considerations and fishery performance. And these reports are available on the Council's website. Interactive versions of the reports are also available at wpcouncildata.org, where users can access and download data that were used to produce the reports. Ecosystem relationships between stocks and fishery dynamics are becoming more critical due to the uncertainty of a changing climate. Climate change remains a notable priority in the Council's 5-year program plan and research priorities, and is directly addressed in our pelagic research program. The Council works with the Western and Central Pacific Fisheries Commission and its science provider, the Pacific Community, in supporting research on the distributional changes of tuna fisheries projected under expected climate change scenarios. Recent research suggests a distributional shift of skipjack tuna that could be either detrimental or fortuitous to small island developing states and territories, which of course can reduce or increase fishing opportunities. The Northern Mariana Islands could expect a 48% increase in skipjack biomass within the U.S. exclusive economic zone by 2050. American Samoa could expect a 42% and 62% increase in skipjack biomass within its EEZ by 2050 and 2100. Scientists from the Pacific Islands Fisheries Science Center and the Council's Pelagic Plan Team are working to develop climate indicators that can impact pelagic fishery performance and directly contribute to recruitment of a very important target species for us, which is big-eyed tuna. Dynamic ocean thermal structures that drive distributional shifts of swordfish and tropical tunas are closely monitored by the Science Center so the Council can make informed decisions on fishing effort and targeting. Funding, of course, is needed to similarly study ecosystem relationships between stocks and fishery dynamics in our archipelago insular fisheries. Funding is also needed to develop an ecosystem-based decision-making tool specific to our fisheries. For example, a harvest control rule system would allow the Council to adjust annual catch limits based on the level of oceanographic productivity or other specific projected ocean conditions. Finally, there is a need for increased targeted funding for this effort and better alignment of priorities among existing and potential partners. Among these partners is the Indigenous Ocean Observation Community. So, in closing, there is an Indigenous Ocean Governance Town Hall today at 11:30 in room 323C, and I ask you to please join us. So, mahalo nui loa.
Mahalo. Thank you so much, Kitty, for a very insightful and excellent presentation. I'd like to call for a round of applause for all of our speakers. Thank you so much. Okay, we've got around 20 minutes for discussion, and I think we can have a very integrated discussion. Some of the questions that have come in we're probably going to integrate some of these in order to have a discussion that can have different perspectives. So some of the questions that John and I have queued up here are things like, what would you, each individually, what would you like to see in 10 years' time? As you know, this is a decadal scale conference. What is your hope that you really want to see in 10 years? That's one thing. We also have a question on what should be our focus? Well, you know, why are we doing this? Should we have a focus? It's one thing to integrate, but what would you like to see as the focus? And then also more specifics on how. We're getting some questions saying, you know, we're talking a lot about lofty goals, but I missed some of the discussion on how. And one of those hows is how can we best build capacity? And John has some stats that he'll share with us about what we've done in terms of international participation here at Ocean Obs 19. So let's start out with that decadal scale. And I don't care if we just go down the line or want to randomly pop up, but what would you like to see in 10 years' time?
So I guess reflecting on what we've seen over the last decade, There's more than twice as many people here, but it's much more diverse. There's a lot more biologists, a lot more younger people. So I think that tells us something. I personally would like to see more of our community of people working on socioeconomics, law and policy, who work on issues like the blue economy, but we're separated from them at the moment. They aren't in the room. I think we're working separately. It's great to have someone like Claire here, and I think that sends a good signal. But I personally feel that needs to be much stronger across the next 10 years.
Great, thank you. I would say, well, maybe two main things. The first one, and I'm sure it's close to the heart of many of the observers in the room, is that indeed we get observations from most parts of the world, because we're still missing that. And the second is indeed, and that links a little bit to what you were saying, Tim, is to make sure that all the observations that are conducted are done in a sustainable way, but sustainably here in terms of funding. And to do that, you need to convince the powers above that indeed the systems need to be constantly upgraded, improved, and at the same time that they provide the information that's really needed. At the end of the day, science, and I said that already several times during other sessions, science is the crucial driver for observations, and that's recognized, and this is something that we're pushing at the OECD. So we're an economic organization, but for us, science is the basis for everything. At the end of the day, we need also to have, I would say, a bit more work on the products and services that are derived from the data from these observations. So it's a lot that needs to be done over the next decade, but it came several times, the fit-for-purpose observing systems. Yeah, add in here some of the users that are not yet engaged and that have needs that are not yet recognized.
Okay, thank you very much. So for me, looking at where I come from, what I would like to see in 10 years, it's got to do with being able to integrate the use of Earth observation data in policy making in all areas or most aspects of development with respect to in government, in the private sector, and this should culminate in creating more awareness on the available data, what kind of data is available, what it can be used for, and looking at everyone being able to know that, okay, this is what is there, this is how I can use it, this is what I should be able to use it for. And that is my key expectation in 10 years. Thank you.
Well, my expectation isn't generally for the next 10 years, but so in our part of the world, we're mainly islands. And what is very important to us is food. So if all of the collaboration and with the scientists and the indigenous communities can maintain a food structure so that we can all survive, I think that would be my hope. We're foodies in the Pacific Islands, to speak plainly, and and of course, you know, representing the indigenous communities, our indigenous people are aware, and we need to have this communication with our scientists from all over the world to share and support and meet with us. So again, I invite you all to our 11:30 session.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to move to address the question, or questions actually, about how this meeting has managed to reach out globally. And it's really good to be able to say actually that pretty much close to 10% of the audience have been supported by our sponsors. So that's 130 people have been supported to travel here from around the world. And in terms of the diversity representation, we have 71 countries represented here. And of those 71, 18 are classified as being underrepresented. So I think that's actually a reasonably decent record. I don't know how that compares with other similar meetings, but I would say that sounds pretty good from my perspective. Okay, maybe we can take a brief question from the floor, but if we could keep the questions brief and questions, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, so I've at the conference this week, I've heard talk about indigenous perspectives and participation. I would like to have the panelists, if they could, to comment on the differences between indigenous perspectives, participation, and partnerships.
Somebody want to take that on?
Well, Ken, I think I explained in my presentation just how we went about developing partnerships so that all of our communities could come together, the scientific community, local governments, international and national governments. And I guess I should say that my vast experience is in managing people with strategic planning. And it's hard work, you know. So I think that if we can, from this conference, have an understanding that we should be doing similar type things in the rest of the world in terms of bringing people together, I think that we can solve many, many problems.
This week is that, what I've heard this week is that we really need to move from consultation to co-design, to co-development. I guess that message has come through strongly. It's certainly one I'll take back to my country, who has much to improve on this front.
Yes, Claire.
And if I may, from what I get also from this conference and from other events is that the importance of the local communities, I mean, it's going to be crucial to actually have the new systems in place and being really taken on board. I think in different parts of the world, that's clearly a signal. And we heard from your presentation, Bennett, in Ghana, the link with the fishermen. I mean, it's crucial also. They're the ones who are the direct users at the end of the day, and they need to make sure that the information is, you know, useful for them at the end of the day. So the importance of local communities, I think for the next decade, that's going to be very important. If I may, just one last thing. Through different conferences, we got the messages sometimes that some of the local communities, especially island communities, sometimes felt a bit, uncomfortable with some of the researchers that were coming to see and visit them. Because basically, very often they came, they picked some data, and then they left, and that's it. They never got the information in return in terms of how well are we doing, actually. And there are a number of case studies there that are quite well known, where we need to change the practices. I think this should not happen in 10 years. Indeed, whenever visiting a place, the local communities should be involved in at least knowing what goes on and maybe provide their knowledge. So that's just my 2 cents here.
When it comes to indigenous participation, I think with the experience that I have or we have from the University of Ghana, when we were developing products and services for the local people, for the indigenous people, they may not know about what satellite data is or what the data can be used for, but we engage them and ask for their need. We engage them for them to understand their need and for them also to understand what we want to provide for them. For instance, when we wanted to give them the text messages for early warning. We went to them, tried to understand how they perceive the waves at sea, and trying to understand how those waves can be, the various wave heights can be categorized and put into the indices that we want to use to communicate to them. So in that case, it becomes an interaction. We interacted with them to be able to provide the services for them, and also they'll give us their perspective and their feedback as well. So that has got to do with the indigenous participation. We need to interact with them more often, and not just to be able to give them something for them to use without them understanding it. And they also must be familiar with what we do. Thank you.
That's fantastic. It really is the theme that I was mentioning earlier about the circle and the feedback, and really making sure that that's clear. Yeah. One comment from Hendrik Tolman: we still focus mainly on science instead of decision support. The true value of our work is in the latter. Could that become a global connection? So maybe that's something we can all think about. I wanted to ask our panelists, we heard your 10-year vision, we heard increased diversity, we heard more users, we heard better integration for increased awareness, and we heard about a focus on food. One of the things that I want to get back to is this question on how and what really are concrete steps that we could take, something that could be implemented. Do you have any suggestions on a concrete step to take forward?
That's a big question, Jen. I guess maybe just to try and get it rolling a little bit, I think our community needs to partner more widely with educators, for example. I think too often we try and do things ourselves a little bit, and I would like to see us. The ocean's a fascinating place. We have. It's not just we're talking a lot about the pressures it's under, but it is a place of wonder. I think it's an interesting place for many people to work in, to apply their skills, their intellect, their knowledge. And I think we could benefit more, and the ocean would benefit more if we could get more diverse people working on these problems.
And Kitty?
Go ahead.
So I will talk about a lot more on collaboration. We need to collaborate with each other in whatever that is being done, so that what is already done can be easily taken on by people who are new in the field, and whatever is going to be new must also be communicated a lot more to whoever is new to the field as well. So we need collaboration in so many aspects, in the aspect of data collection, in the aspect of knowledge sharing, so many aspects. So my key focus or take home should be collaboration.
Yeah. Kitty, you want to say something?
I guess I'd just like to add, I mentioned the Ahamoku system briefly, and what that is an ancient system that we were able to see the legislature in the state of Hawaii adopt as best practice for resource management. And the AHA is a cord that weaves together all the different elements of management. So that's a symbol. So each cord represents a farmer, a fisherman, everyone in the community that is involved in continuing life in the community. And so that's our symbol of working together, collaborating, all these words that we've been using. Our word is Ahamoku.
Yeah.
Yeah, one last. Yes. Okay. Maybe one last thing. Actually, I don't have the perfect answer here for collaboration. I think is going to be a key word, but to translate that into real actions, what I would be very curious to see is following this conference in terms of the best practices, I'm sure there are a lot of information in all the white papers. I haven't read all the white papers. In terms of some of the good practices in collaborating together that can be taken out with some sort of best of. Because beyond actually organizing a very technical workshop, beyond working on a very specific project, there are some bits and pieces that can be taken out and that can actually help out in terms of how do you improve your collaboration at the end of the day. So I'd be very curious to actually see some of the outputs coming out of this that could fit into the best practices for this community.
So I hope someone's taking notes somewhere. So we are running short of time, but I wanted to expand on that a little bit, because there's a really nice question here about the fact that there are a few representatives here from the international funding agencies and or philanthropic organisations. And so how do we better reach out to these sorts of funds? And maybe that's one maybe for you, Claire, first, but and then sorry for people on the floor, we will come to you in a second. So maybe we can be a bit brief.
I do believe that actually this week, most of the large foundations that deal with the ocean are meeting. They want to put together a strategy to actually try to come together and support very specific projects together. Meaning basically that at the end of the day, the aim would be for many of the foundations that we all know, more or less, instead of funding specific projects with a few 100,000 or a few millions, actually come together for much larger projects to actually really be game changers over the next couple of years. And I think they're all thinking of the ocean science decade that's coming up. So that means that I think there's a bit of homework to be done in terms of actually indeed trying to capture some of that philanthropic funding that will become available, I think, over the next couple of years. So they're not probably here, but I know many of them are actually looking very closely at what will happen and what should happen over the next 10 years. So this is, I'm not from the philanthropy world, but at least that's something, and that's a signal that we're having.
That's great to hear. There's opportunity. Okay, we're going to go to the microphone over here.
Hi there. My name's Eugene Berger from PML in Seattle, and Dr. Foley showed a great example of someone looking at 20 characters of text on their cell phone with a message that impacts their life that day, and that message was synthesized from probably terabytes of data. That synthesis is dependent on services from the bottom up at making, enabling that data to be synthesized towards that message. The meteorological community is has done this over the last 50 to 80 years. They've done that very successfully, and the oceanographic community is probably 50 years to 30 to 50 years behind the meteorological community. We're a very different community. So I wonder, my question to the panel is, how do we encourage a greater appetite in the oceanographic community for standard services and data standards, an appetite to move ahead in the next 10 years to allow ocean data to be synthesized to what we just saw in Dr. Foley's example?
I agree with your point. I do see some positive moves in that direction. Certainly the way some of the WMO reform is playing out, it appear that the ocean is going to be more important. I mean, many countries have med agencies. NOAA, in my experience, is quite an unusual organisation in having ocean and atmosphere with equivalence in its title. So I think we have to work harder to try and get the ocean recognised, particularly by med agencies. But as I said, I see some hope for that. The numerical weather prediction is going to go coupled. I think there's a number of reasons why this will happen, and hopefully, given that history in the Met community, we can move forward very fast in the oceanographic community.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's 10:58, so I'm sorry. I think our time for questions has run out, but please come up to the table here if you'd like to interact with our panelists. They'll hang out here. There's always so many more good questions. A couple things I want to say before we close. We've been talking about the community white papers, and if you go to the exhibition hall, you can pick up one of these little, whatever you call them, thumb drives, that have all the community white papers on them. So it's at the Ocean Observing Lounge, wherever that is, in the exhibit hall. Very nice little lanyard. No plastic is involved, it's wooden. Also, we want to invite you to come back promptly at 11:30. We will have a panel, Connecting Humanity with Ocean Observations, Interoperability and Governance, so really picking up on this integration theme. We know there's many other special sessions out there that start at 11:30 as well. So with that, I'd like to thank this panel one more time.
And thank you for the great participation from the audience as well. Mahalo. Thank you.